Hello again, this is John Cacavaro, Chief Architect for Radius. Today's talk is going to be on custom validators and entity validators. The last discussion we had covered frameworks' capabilities to generate sophisticated but yet easy to use validations. We're going to dive in a little deeper and we're going to see how we can inject our own custom validations into that pipeline. We're also going to take a quick look at what we call entity validators. Entity validators are created for you. You don't worry about them. You barely know they're there, but they do a very important job. An entity validator will validate certain things about your entity before they go to the database. For example, if name, as you can see, we have our car access model up, the one that we've been talking about. If we have name, and name is 255 characters in length, and somebody inputs, say, 300 characters in length, and it gets past the GUI, and we didn't create any other validator, frameworks will create an entity validator that will be kind of a last chance check before that information is updated or inserted into the database. And we do this because if the database catches it, you're going to get a database error. It's going to be a very ugly error, and it's not something that we want to bubble up throughout our layers, and potentially, if we're not careful, all the way to the user. So let's take a look at the entity validator. They're created automatically for you. So if we click here and open entity validators and we look at the car entity validator, then we can see that Frameworks has generated some code for us. And we will look at name. Well, let's go back up and let's look at the top first. So it has a validate method, and it validates these items. We'll look at the length. So this is telling us if the car name is null, don't worry about it, return. If it's less than 255, which was the length that was given to us by the property editor, and is actually the default first string, then don't worry about it, return. Otherwise, create a validation result and give it the validation result a tag, and give it some type of message. And as you can see, it automatically created string not null, name, fuel type, car, and card type. I imagine that those must be there, and that is in fact the case. So it's a way to catch last chance errors before it goes to the database and give you some ugly error. Other than that, you don't have to worry about them. You don't have to write them. There are ways to inject yourself into the pipeline should that be necessary. However, I'm not sure that we have ever needed to do so. So I will leave it there and I will move on. The next subject will be custom validators. Now we saw how we can choose a property of a request object and check a few boxes, give Framework some information, and it will create these validations for us. But what if we needed to do a more sophisticated validation? One that isn't so obvious and one that can't be declared or modeled by frameworks so easily. Well, there's certainly a way to do that, and that's what we're going to discover now. I'm going to go back to my Solution Explorer, and I have prepared such a validator. It's called the getCarRequest validator, so let's look at that. So I started this validator just by copying the generated validator that was created by frameworks. So I just took that file, copied it, and placed it into a validators folder that I created that was under the car access. I wrote some code. So this is going to be a partial class of the getCarRequest validator and it's going to overwrite the validate method. So get car request, if we were to look at the generated code unit, get car request validator descends from validator base, and validator base does some validations. Using this technique, we can easily inject ourselves into the pipeline. And in this case, I wrote one method, and that method is validate seats. So we call our validate seats, and I just followed our normal pattern of doing this in parallel. Normally for one method, you wouldn't do it. You don't need it. It's probably, in fact, detrimental. But I copied the pattern, so I'll leave it there. And here what we do is I say if there is not an item in the object list of the object cache, then return. Remember from our last discussion, we had a validator that places a car entity into the object cache. So I'm saying if the car entity doesn't exist, then don't do anything. But if the car entity does exist, then we get that car entity, and for convenience purposes, I put it into a private or a scoped or variable to this method. And I just made something silly, like if car number of seats is less than 5, then return, don't do anything. And if it's greater than 4, however, we do create a validation result. The validation result says car has more than 4 seats, and we give it an enum, and this enum, I'm going to go and place an enum here. I'm going to say car has more than 4 seats. Notice how now I can't see what the enum is saying. So what I will do is I will increase the size of my box. But then when I increase the size of the box, it definitely looks ugly because it's out of alignment. So I'll put that back, and I'll show you an easy way to change them all at one time. So I'm going to select them all and drag them all at the same time. A little too much there. That looks good. And now they all are in alignment, and I can see the model. I will save it, and I will go back to my get car request validator, and I will say car has more than 4 seats. Now in this case, I've chosen to make the severity of the validation information. There are different types of severities: error, information, warning, and I'm just going to make it information. So that will not trip the is valid flag of validation results. So if a consumer is sitting there watching, I'm going to pretend I'm a consumer now. If the consumer is watching this validation results and they say something like, validation results, that's better, is valid, unless there's a validation result, at least one that has a validation severity of error, then the validation results is going to return valid, whether or not there are any validations in there. So in summary, the validation results is a list of validation result objects, and a validation result object must have a severity of error in order to trip the is valid flag. So in this case, it's just a way of telling the user, be careful, there's a car that has more than 4 seats. Okay. Let's go back. And that is custom validations and entity validators. Our next discussion will be on an interesting subject called redactions. Thank you.